Hello and welcome to Partyline Chat. My name is Michael Finney. Got a good group of folks hanging out today. We are doing the program Hello Nashimoto. I'm going to kick it over to the guests. They are welcome to introduce themselves. Some names you know. They're returning. Back again.
Hey, I guess I'll go first. I'm mikeinspace, Bitcoiner. I'm on Twitter at mikeinspace, and I used to do a little program called Bitcoin Car Talk, and now I just kind of tweet all day.
Why did you get to go first?
There was a big pause, so I figured might as well.
I'm Adam Sussman at Adam Sussman on Twitter. I'm in the financial space world. Was early in the crypto community and sort of semi-famous in financial Twitter, but I have a small enough following where you probably wouldn't believe that.
John, why don't you introduce yourself now?
Yeah, so I'm Jon Gulson. I run a Nash bot at famous_ideal on Twitter. My kind of background is financial services, or was, and I kind of fell into Bitcoin about 2015 and got interested in the Nash angle to Bitcoin and what it is, where it came from, etc. So, yeah, so that's me.
You're hard to understand with your accent. I'll translate a little bit. So, John...
Dogging him. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's some titles going on here.
You know what? Canadians have accents too, and if that's where you guys want to start the program, that's fine.
No, we are the language.
Okay.
So John writes about Nash's work, Ideal Money. We can introduce it and explain it, or we don't have to. We can just talk about it. But yeah. I'm pretty sure that his readership hasn't found him, and it will. And it's really good stuff. It's not going to come across to everyone, but he has a way with language. So it's the first time I've heard him speak, I think, and so that's interesting.
I agree. Yeah, John is a great writer, and actually, a couple of his articles have really attracted some attention and some decent readership over the past couple of months. He's definitely had some articles.
Yeah, we don't know where from though, do we, Michael?
Yeah.
Kind of, because Michael, my blogs now, you publish them, don't you?
Well, I mean, I put him through like a channel that I have on Medium, but I think that people are drawn to what you're talking about and the way that you're talking about it. Fundamentally, you're a good writer and an engaging writer, so it's nice to read, and I think that's why people are drawn to what you're saying, not only because the topics are relevant, but also because they like the way that your prose fits together, John.
Yeah, thanks.
He's great at picking headlines. Like he'll DM me a new article, and I just read the headline. I'm like, oh, that's a great title, and I'll retweet it. I don't even read the article.
So yeah, I think we are lucky to get to hear you today, John, and appreciate you coming on to the program as your first voice appearance. People know what you look like, but they might not have known what you sound like yet.
Yeah, this is the first time I've done a podcast, so you'll have to go easy on me.
Yeah, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to completely take it back to the wall about John Nash today.
Yeah, go on then. Ready for it.
Well, let's make it a little bit. Let's make it easier. What have you changed your mind on, like Johnny or guys, in the last couple of months or year, with your writing and what you've researched and what you've seen and how it relates? So, like something that you've thought about for a while and now have changed your mind on recently.
Well, I kind of first got into the kind of Nash aspect when I met Jow. It was on Bitcoin Reddit, I think, wasn't it, Jow? I think it was around 2017, 2016. That's how we kind of...
I got kicked off of that constantly. What was your name on Reddit?
Art of Blocks.
Yeah,
I don't really use it that much anymore, but that's how we first... that's how we kind of first got introduced to each other. And just from there... the first thing I remember reading from Nash was Parallel Control. which is it's not easy reading. I don't know how many times I've read it, but it's more than 20, and I'm not sure I still properly understand it, but I remember one line in it about the idea is to decentralise control. It's an idea for electronic brains of the future.
Yes.
And that's how I kind of first... That's when I remember something. I distinctly remember that point when I read it, and I thought, oh, something's twigged here. And then we kind of continued the dialogue, and we've kind of known each other for a few years now. But back to the questions like what's changed recently, I kind of just made a concerted effort to read kind of like Nash's works, like The Bargaining Problem, and his literature on cooperative games, Nash Equilibrium, Parallel Control, and then I just kind of started trying to put dots together or join the dots, and that's kind of really where I'm coming from with it.
You know,
do you see this Mike in space?
Real quick, so you guys know, you can post links into the chat as well if you want to direct other folks to stuff that you're talking about. Not only within, here where we're talking, but just for viewership as well.
Perfect. Do you see this Mike in space? He's been reading the source material. How do you feel about that?
He's been reading the source material.
Yes, and then other people don't, and they opine on it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, everyone has an opinion on Nash, it seems. But maybe they've only seen the movie.
Right, that's the problem.
Oh,
yeah. So,
John, I actually did call that number too, and it goes to someone else now. It doesn't go to her.
Oh, I see. Right, yeah. Yeah, so we had an idea about trying to get Sylvia Nazar onto the podcast, which might have been a bit ambitious, but so is that what you're talking about, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's an idea to consider in the future.
Yeah.
But kind of where I differentiate my kind of understanding of Bitcoin and where I'm coming from is a generalization that it's deterministic. So what I mean by that is some people say Bitcoin works in practice, but not necessarily in theory. But I think it works in practice because it's based in game theory. More precisely, kind of it's axiomatic to 4 principles that Nash established in the bargaining problem. So the idea was the bargaining problem, his big breakthrough was it resolved determination in economic interaction. So if you ask now, like the most kind of ardent Bitcoin supporters or kind of maximalists, what are the 2 problems Bitcoin itself says it solves? I suspect you'd get a tiny fraction who would say, well, one of the problems it says it solves is fraud in double spending. So most people are aware of that. But the second problem it says it solves is the determination of representation in majority decision making. So that kind of goes in. That's kind of why I get into this idea that Bitcoin is deterministic, and that kind of leads me into ideas as to kind of where it's come from, which I'm not really sure how well that kind of line of thinking lends itself to kind of social media or podcasts or things like that, because that's not really how kind of Bitcoin has popularized itself. I don't know what people think to that.
What do you think, Adam? Do you think it's deterministic?
That's good. I don't know. I just have a general sense that we are just uncovering the layers, right, of it in a way, and I want to be able to understand. I started just reading Nash, all that your Twitter. I have not gone through all of what you are speaking about, but it is definitely deterministic in my mind. But that doesn't mean that it makes sense for it to unfold in my mind. It's sort of like we all should go backwards, right? That founding document that everybody's kind of saying what it means, right? And all the
guys, it might be helpful for the audience and even for some of us up here to just give us the 101 on asymptotic money Nash equilibrium and how Bitcoin fits into this, because I think we hit the ground running, and maybe some people in the audience really don't know what we're talking about.
possible.
I think so, and I sort of was rambling there, but I would like Johnny's kind of insight on what his overarching view of like the forward progress looks like.
Yeah, so kind of the ideal money that Nash kind of wrote about was an ideal money that wasn't intrinsically subject to inflation. And I think he kind of then realised that an ideal money can't be so perfect or ideal if it doesn't have inflation because it won't circulate. So he introduced this idea of asymptotically ideal money, which essentially was ideal money by another means. But what he did is he introduced an inflation or a supply inflation that was steady and constant. It's interesting how both Nash and Satoshi described their respective monies with those two same words. One, the inflation is steady, and the inflation is constant. And that's kind of the most obvious link to me. The Nash equilibrium aspect to it is that kind of goes then into how cooperative games are modelled, and how such an ideal money would have a utility or a use case. I don't know whether any of that makes sense to you guys.
What you said, is Bitcoin's inflation rate constant? Because some people would say that it's not, but both Nash and Satoshi explained it was.
Well, the supply side economics of it are steady and constant because you've got the difficulty adjustment. So no matter how much kind of energy is directed into the network, the kind of inflation schedule is always going to be. We can, in probability, we know that there's going to be around 21 million coins ever released, and it's because of the adjustment mechanism that's possible. So that's kind of one of the things that I've kind of picked out, and that for me goes back to one of the axioms that Nash used in the bargaining problem in 1950, where okay, I don't know, does that kind of make sense to you guys? I don't want to kind of talk on a kind of a overly.
No, I like that. Keep going. I thought that was keep going there.
Yes, so Nash went in the bargaining problem, which is kind of where I think people realised this guy he was out of the ordinary. He was kind of picking up a problem that von Neumann was trying to solve in terms of using game theory or a branch of mathematics to kind of rationalise kind of human behaviour through economic interaction. But von Neumann and Morgenstern, in that book that they wrote, with the theory of games and economic behaviour, they couldn't arrive at a deterministic point that a solution existed for all games. So Nash came along and introduced an axiomatic approach, and he worked on 4 axioms. So one of those was Pareto efficiency, the other one was symmetry, and the third one was invariance to scale. And that's really why I think the invariance to scale, that axiom, it relates into difficulty adjustment. So it just means that Bitcoin supply inflation is kept steady and constant. And from there, because we probably know how many coins are going to be ever in existence, people can then form kind of expectations about what Bitcoin will do as an asset or a form of money. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
Ask a clarifying question, Mike.
Okay, so how does this all kind of fit into how the CPI basket's used? Because that was always my understanding, where inflation is kind of targeted against a CPI basket, but what goes into that basket is kind of subjective, and Bitcoin is a better way to kind of model that. Am I anywhere close?
Do you know a CPI basket, Adam?
I do. I'm actually linking right now into the notes. There's a really wonderful, a really deep dive on CPI and how it's actually built out and looked at. This guy's name is Victor Sheets. It's lots. I just linked it over it. Okay, so CPI is obviously just a basket of goods. There's a bunch of different indexes. There's one that was going around Twitter a while ago that got a lot of shit because it was I don't remember the name of the index, but it was really BS. It was kind of showing everything was just spiking at out of control, over 3,000% year over year.
Right.
The official stats, we did hit a 5.5% inflation rate, like the last print, and that is really hot, no matter how you look at it. But again, you can look at it via a COVID lens. You can look at it via a shipping issue, lens. You can look at it from all sorts of angles, and people can discuss the sort of, well, how much money did we just print, during COVID? And it's like, well, it's not really, the money's not printed, and it's not really outside the banking system, and so there's that's a big, big, ugly thing to unpack from an inflationary standpoint. I just view the difficulty adjustment as the most genius thing on planet Earth. It's just, hey, if people are interested and there's enough energy into it, well, it's going to be more difficult to make, and if it's not, then it'll be less difficult. And it just seems so perfect. I mean, I've never heard about it before. I didn't read really Nash's work before Satoshi stuff, so I didn't really know this stuff, and it was really shockingly eye-opening how genius just that one piece of the puzzle is.
Where did that come from?
Where did that's a great question. Where did that idea come from for making a difficulty adjustment? I think it was early in the Bitcoin email chains between, I think Hal and him had some discussions on it, but I don't really know the history of it. There's
a quote, isn't there, Joe, by, well, not quote, he wrote it in about 2002, or the early versions of Ideal Money, that he said a miracle energy source doesn't have to be good for all time, it just has to regularly readjust. So that's kind of another kind of obvious connection between Nash and Bitcoin.
He said, so you have to trace the concept of a CPI towards an ICPI, which would be a globally held CPI. But he says, and then he's like, wait a minute, if a miracle energy source comes along and completely reduces the cost to produce whatever materials you're using for the CPI, it would just destroy its use. And so he says that would require political intervention, and if you follow the talk, that defeats the purpose of having an ICPI. And with the DAA, the difficulty adjustment algorithm, if you understand it, it completely takes out the politics. It's self-adjustment.
Yeah. It also means that there isn't an arbitrary approach to inflation. So Nash again uses that word. Well, Satoshi said, escape the arbitrary inflation risk of central banks. I think more or less that's what he said. But also Nash somewhere says an ideal money would be free of arbitrary inflation. So you kind of come back to this idea that with difficulty adjustment, you have kind of a form of determination, or it's a deterministic form of money. So for me, that's kind of quite a clear link between Nash and Nash's ideas on ideal money, and how Bitcoin's kind of looks like it's an implementation of that.
But can we talk about how, what form would ideal money take? Would it be just like this sort of central bank money between banks? Would this be like the money I use as an individual? What role would it be in that kind of world?
So that's a good question. I think that's possibly where myself and Jao may kind of maybe differentiate our kind of views on that. So simply, I think an ideal money would assume purpose or utility as being used in commercial contracts. So it's quite a normal practice for contracts. Any kind of contract will index to inflation. And kind of Nash was pretty explicit, really, where he said his first ideas on ideal money would be is that of the importance of the comparative quality of the money used in an economic society to the possible precision or as an indicator of quality of the contracts for performances of future contractual obligations. So it just seems kind of that's how he was. I don't think central banks will ever target something like Bitcoin. I kind of know Jao he likes the idea. I'm not so sure on it. I think it's really about using an ideal money as a form of indexation in contracts, because most contracts will adjust to inflation. The idea that contracts are kind of gilt-edged or inflation-hedged, an ideal money would be kind of. I think that's really where Nash was coming from on it. Because then you get into the idea of the difference between non-cooperative games and cooperative games. And it's really, people begin to cooperate when there are contracts in place, and they begin to meet their contractual obligations. That's kind of like, I think that's a staple, or that's an underpinning idea of game theory in terms of how non-cooperative and cooperative games differ. And that seems to me how and where Bitcoin has come from. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, to a certain extent. But I mean, so in this world, would I still be using a fiat, but it would be like, I don't know, a better fiat because of Bitcoin being used as an ideal money between central banks? Like, maybe you can just like articulate what that world would look like in terms of just how regular commerce would take place.
In that kind of world, I don't think central banks would probably exist. So, for start, that kind of term as well that you use, I mean, people might find it quite contentious to. So, if I said Bitcoin itself is fiat because it's not actually backed by anything, it can't be. Well,
yeah, it meets the definition of fiat. It's by decree in a certain extent. Yeah, people get up in arms about that word, but yeah, it kind of meets the definition.
Yeah, so in that kind of world of ideal money, I don't think central banks would exist. There'd be no reason for them to kind of target an arbitrary rate of inflation. So, yeah.
Shinobi would like that. You said that.
Yeah, and I think that you may disagree with some of what I've just said there, John. I don't know.
No, I think asymptotically central banks won't exist. So in the long future they won't. I just don't want us to think that like tomorrow Bitcoin will go through the roof and central banks will die. That's a silly notion.
No, that's probably what. Yeah.
Yeah, central banks help each nation, and they might not be used in the future, but they were helpful along the way.
And they might not all die out at the exact same time. In some places, they might still be viable solutions for a set of conditions.
Yeah. I think one of the other things I kind of think also is that the idea of payment efficiencies or kind of side payments. Nash said in one of his early works, I think it's two-person cooperative games, that side payments are not a special consideration in comparison to the idea of determination. And that's the kind of another. I kind of wrote my last blog, or one of my last blogs, kind of covered that idea. But it is quite deep subject matter, so I don't know how well I'm kind of explaining this. Yeah, it's just kind of the idea. So that kind of what's traditionally known as a Bitcoin maximalist will say Bitcoin's about separating state and money, and so to some extent it possibly is. But this idea that kind of Bitcoin is a standalone system and that governments aren't going to kind of react to it, I think that's a little bit kind of too idealistic, or it's not realistic.
I think that's already been front run though, right? Like we already know that the Treasury, the BSA, everybody's got like they're all, day glow painted orange every Bitcoin in the system. Like everybody knows where everything is. I've been paying taxes the moment I joined the crypto space in 2011. Like I don't know that there's not like a control discussion. Like it's very difficult for me to kind of grasp 4, 5, 6 years from now, whenever transitions happen globally, I can't imagine seeing fiat just being like, well, it's no longer useful. And I think we've talked about weighing mechanisms before, right? Bitcoin, I know somebody on this chat knows that for sure, just talking about explaining the weighing mechanism of what Bitcoin looks like in a still existing fiat world. There's a lot to unpack for sure, but I'm enjoying what you're saying, Johnny, so please keep going.
I'm not sure what else to add. It's quite interesting. I don't know, Mike in space. Chris DeRose was in the newspapers over here in the UK at the weekend. Did you know that?
Really? No, I did not. What was that about?
So the Financial Times in London, which I'm assuming you've heard of.
Yeah.
So they did an article called "The Cult of Crypto."
Oh, I got to read that.
And then somebody sent it to me, who I'm having I have occasional dialogue with, and she said, "Oh, you want to read this?" And I sort of read the title, "The Cult of Crypto." It's like, another Bitcoin is a cult kind of thing.
Yeah.
And but I read it, and it was Chris DeRose. I think he was the first words in the article. Basically, they were talking about how he became disillusioned with it all.
Yeah,
he's kind of packed up and left, hasn't he? And left the space.
Basically, he deleted his Twitter, his podcast, the YouTube channel. It's all gone. Yeah, he kind of stepped back.
Yeah, and because he liked the idea of kind of deconstructing the idea of maximalism.
Yeah.
Do you remember Jal? He had that. He had a run-in with someone, didn't he? Did he submit a Bitcoin? He submitted a proposal, didn't he, to Bitcoin Core, and they rejected it.
Yeah, Mike knows more about that.
Oh, it's been so long. Yeah, I remember that. It had to do with it had to do with having a roadmap, because there really isn't one with Bitcoin Core, and because Bitcoin Core is decentralized, right? So you can't really have an official roadmap, I suppose.
You're not supposed to call it Bitcoin Core, I don't think.
Right, yeah. So he was trying, it was like a meta joke almost, like where he's trying to say, well, obviously there's a core, right? There's a repo, and there's people who can commit to that repo, and it's called Bitcoin Core, core, the center. So he was just kind of making an ironic kind of joke on the whole thing.
Yeah, and what this article did, the guy who was interviewing him, he kind of got Chris to explain why he left, what he didn't like about it.
Yeah.
And I think it was the idea that he found some of the things that were being said around Bitcoin as unrealistic. But that's kind of interesting also, because when we do get into this idea of adjustment versus like static views or a utopia on what's ideal in terms of
I'm
what we
going
want.
to push back on that a little bit, because oftentimes Bitcoin is said to have a cult, and it's in a very negative tone. But I mean, it's almost like the cult is needed. Like, these rules are all social consensus, right? 21 million and difficulty adjustment. You almost need like a strong cult to enforce it. And I'm kind of curious, like, within the context of Nash and using Bitcoin in that role, I mean, can it be plumbing? Can Bitcoin be plumbing without the cult? Like, who's enforcing the consensus rules, and do they care anymore about 21 million? Are they going to inflate it away when it becomes convenient to do so? So I kind of, that's my one concern, where it's like, once it becomes very big and mainstream, and you kind of lose that cult element, is there anyone kind of protecting consensus at that point?
I think that might come down to the design of it, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, again, this is social consensus. And I know Bitcoiners don't like that. They like to say that Bitcoin is protected by math, right? But really, I mean, it's not math. It's a code. It's a repo, and people decide what they want to run on their nodes. And there's, there's some nodes are more important than the other nodes if they're economic nodes, and so, but really, it's like, there's a 21 million hard cap because we say there's a 21 million hard cap. It's really just people, Bitcoin is people.
Yeah. Is it probable though that hard cap will ever change?
Well,
for that to happen.
I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, right now, if you look at the mempool, it's empty. I mean, you can do a transaction for a couple pennies, and that's got to pick up at some point because the subsidy's disappearing. So, I mean, something's got to give. If everyone says no, that the cap will never raise it, but if the alternative is just death of the protocol, people might start coming around to that. Because you're
speaking to an equilibrium.
Right, but here's the thing, even with the difficulty adjustment, it all sounds good in theory, but it takes 2016 blocks to readjust. So if the hash rate falls off a cliff, it's going to take quite a while to get to the next block, and that can cause a lot of harm in the meantime, right?
Yeah.
If you ever get there.
Yeah. Is it 2 weeks of harm about?
Well, right, no, it's 2 weeks at the current hash rate, but if hash rate just falls off a cliff all of a sudden, it could take forever.
Right. So if a miracle energy source comes along, then you would need...
Well, there's still the bottleneck of the ASICs themselves, right? You can only make them so quickly. But yeah, if there's a miracle energy source, that could also screw with the difficulty readjustment. Right. Well, at least for one cycle, at least 1 or 2 cycles, and then it'll obviously readjust upwards.
Yeah.
How much did Satoshi? I mean, I've read as much as I can, but the discussion of post, block subsidies and the internal fees. It seemed to me like he kind of threw it off, like at least from Satoshi's writings, from what I remember, it was like, yeah, it'll be fine because it'll just be the fee transactions will support the network. So, and then that goes back into that big block versus small block thing. It's like, well, if it doesn't cost anything to transact, then what's the economic incentive then post block subsidy in a big block versus small block world, let's say?
So if you were Satoshi and you had this technology and you cared, like let's say you're benevolent, how much time would you spend thinking about this and making sure you didn't screw this problem up?
I don't have an answer to that question.
I suppose, I mean, at a certain point, like even if Bitcoin just becomes plumbing, there will be incentive to even mine at a loss because it'll be so important. It'll be like too big to fail. Yeah. So even if like,
just because
perhaps that's
financial.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's where we end up. Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of IT equipment run in all kinds of industries where they just look at it as a cost.
Yeah. But look at what happened with Bitcoin Cash when they first split. What was the first thing they did? They messed around with the difficulty readjustment, right? Just so that they could survive. And so you start to wonder, it's like, well, once you don't have the cult anymore and it just becomes plumbing, do the big players just say, oh, we'll just adjust the difficulty if we need to. No big deal.
If the hash rate dropped off a cliff and blocks slowed, the fees would increase.
Well, if people want to transact on L1, but I mean,
right.
what is? Here's the thing: it's like once you have L2s and people are using custodial things, and Bitcoin is just plumbing for, as this sort of currency peg. Is that what you'd want to call it in the Nash equilibrium, or
maybe even in that state? It might even be just like an informational snapshot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So then, who's filling these blocks?
Well, I mean, okay, so under these conditions, it sounds like blocks are not being created. So that final snapshot allows for an infinite number of layer 2s to be able to be implemented on top of that snapshot.
That's a big if, though. Why would we can assume that, but most of that activity could just be on custodial services, or it could be Lightning on top of.
Well, yeah, but I consider Lightning to fundamentally become a custodial service because of the liquidity in the hubs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a better experience if you're using custodial service. I run non-custodial Lightning, and there are hiccups and there's bottlenecks, and I do it because I'm geeky in that way. But the average person is not going to do that. They will gravitate towards the simpler cheaper solutions.
So, Mike, let's actually spin this into a real world example where people were talking about the Chivo wallet with El Salvador.
Right.
And what was kind of happening there. And
well, yeah, I don't know really about the internals there. I don't. But yeah, I think there were
people saying like, "Oh, look, you can now use Bitcoin as a national currency," and then there were other people saying like, "Yeah, but you can't get it off of that wallet."
Right. Yeah, there were some
temporary issues.
Well, I assume that
out a workaround for it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that it's custodial because the Lightning Network wouldn't be able to support that kind of activity. But yeah, there were issues coming up where they couldn't move sats over to, I think, Moon Wallet or some of these other ones. I mean, a lot of it could just be early hiccups. They really messed up on that first day. But yeah, I would need to know more about the technicals about how it's implemented, but I'm pretty sure it's custodial.
Yeah, I believe that's correct too. And again, like my thinking on Lightning Network is just fundamentally because of how liquidity and hubs will work. For most people, it'll, even if it doesn't necessarily look custodial on the surface, it will fundamentally be custodial.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of fight a little bit with other Bitcoiners about this because they'll say, hey, use this mobile Lightning wallet, and it's non-custodial, but it's only got a single channel to a hub.
Right.
And it's like, no, well, in my view, that's custodial. Because if you only have one path and it's through a hub, well, they can censor you. And so and they'll argue about, well, you're using the public Lightning Network, it's non-custodial, but I think if you're forced to go through their hub, then in my mind, that's custodial. You need to have multiple pathways.
Isn't anything level 2 custodial?
I mean, I guess we're getting into a bit of a philosophical talk there. I mean, I think Lightning can be non-custodial. I kind of feel I use it in a non-custodial way. But then if you're talking about, well, ultimately miners have to, mine your opening and closing, and they could censor those. Is that... there's a lot to it. I don't know.
Yeah, at various levels, right? It kind of like inverts over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, you can make the argument. I mean, I can't read code. I'm trusting the core devs when I'm running my Bitcoin node. So, I mean, is that custodial? I mean, for 99% of the population, it kind of is. Because I can't, like, whatever code I'm running, I'm not verifying, like, line by line. I'm trusting.
So Nash talks about the concept of translatability, and I know I've skipped 14 lines here, but you just touched on that. I mean, what's translatable from what Satoshi did?
Now, do we believe, or is the theory here that Nash literally is Satoshi, or just that they both had, the same kind
that's my belief.
Good idea.
Nash was Satoshi.
Because how old was he in 2009?
81.
I guess, but so and I'm not saying he couldn't do it, but I mean, I'm assuming he would be working within a team, or you think he did it solo on his own?
Well, I wrote a blog once, Michael, that Michael published, called Satoshi Nakamoto was an octogenarian. But I don't see why it couldn't. So some people say he couldn't code, but he was familiar with the language C, and just all the kind of. If you look at Bitcoin as a design, and if you look at the design as containing axioms, then it just seems obvious. Well, I'm not saying obvious, but the connection between the two just seems too much to ignore.
I mean, I can say the same about Hal Finney. I mean, there's a lot of evidence pointing at Hal Finney as well.
That's kind of assuming he was talking to himself on the internet, which sounds a bit.
Well, that's what you'd want to do.
Yeah, but you know what? Actually, there is a precedent for stuff like that. So, what is it? The Age of Spiritual Machines. Kurzweil does that over the course of like 15 chapters or whatever, where he's basically having a dialogue with himself via an avatar.
His bot, Romana, whatever her name is. Yeah.
Well, no, I think that was before that. The character inside of Age of Spiritual Machines is, I don't remember her name, but yeah. And basically over the course of that book, each chapter becomes more focused on the dialogue as he goes further into speculating about the future. But I think that, people do use anonymity as a way to, or even just characters as a way to create a dialogue, or even to have, a seemingly a third party discussion.
Who created Bitcoin? Was it Szabo? Did Szabo do it by himself? Who created Bitcoin?
Definitely. No, Szabo feels like a mean. Yeah, he doesn't feel like it. I don't know. You could look at the references on the white paper and go, I don't know. Well, Bayer could, or Messier, or even Dai or B Money. I mean, all these guys could have.
If I had to put money on it, I would say Finney personally.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm like 99% positive.
Did he consult with Szabo?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm sure he got influence from a number of sources, but in terms of the one who did the majority of it, I would say it was Finney.
So, Szabo, Finney in about 2002 wrote a little letter in a mailing that said, "I think Nash is an extropian. I think Nash is an extropian thinker. Here's the reasons why, blah, blah, blah." For 20 years, around that time, for 20 years up until like 5 years ago, Nash had been speaking about ideal money, and we all know what he said about it. And Szabo wrote Blockchains and Social Scalability and said, here are the brilliant trade-offs that Satoshi figured out. Szabo, he's got some weird views, but I don't think he's so egotistical that he speak to himself and say, I'm brilliant. Szabo said, here is why Satoshi is brilliant.
I've read a lot of Szabo stuff. I have a huge amount of respect for him. I think he's super. So
if you read,
I don't think he's a Satoshi though. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So he said, "Here's why Satoshi is brilliant," and you must have read that.
I don't think he. That's what I'm saying. I don't think he's Satoshi. I certainly think that I love his writing on all the early forms of money, and I like all his. But I think his blog is essential. I do not think he's Satoshi, though.
Okay. And do you think Hal Finney is or has anything?
No, I'm one of those crazy idiots that are like, got hooked into the mind meld of DeSantis, and it's two nation states having a quantum computer sniffer. You could really put a tinfoil hat on and have fun with this stuff. I don't think it's even worth figuring out who it really is or try, because I don't think you'll ever really know. I mean, there was that thing Obama supposedly tried to find out who he was. I remember hearing about it, but I think it's two nation states trying to figure out a way to create a system to sniff out a quantum computer in the wild, because that is the biggest, let's call it national security risk, period. So it's stupid sounding, and I know it's tinfoil hat-ish, but that's fine. It is so interesting that it makes sense, because it certainly is a quantum computer sniffer, right? Like, so, I'm convinced that it's something a lot more nefarious and weird than hey, it's Szabo or it's somebody else. I don't think that's possible to even figure out. So if it's not possible to figure out, let's go the furthest, craziest possibility, and that's where I line up.
Okay, so you 100% think it's Nash. We get that.
Right, exactly. There you go.
You think it's Nash, do you, Adam?
Well, I think that the most likely outcome is a blend of Nash and somebody else. I think Nash would certainly have worked on it with somebody else, but I don't know who.
So Adam Back is another obvious candidate, but he's always denied it, and he said he thinks Satoshi was one guy because of the coding style. So I'm not computer coder or kind of.
And neither am I. Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue is that a lot of the people that can communicate this stuff, like you, Johnny, and people like me trying to be able to figure out how to communicate this stuff correctly. It's like we're not coders. Like I can't read C++. I've got people that I rely on to tell me what this looks like and what this means, but it just like it comes back to what we were just discussing before about as level 2 is a custodian or whatever. It's like, well, everything's sort of. Like you said, flip it on its head, everything kind of goes wacky. Any line we go down trying to figure out what Bitcoin is or how to describe it, it just ends up being, well, it is this, but actually it's the exact opposite of this as well. And it's very frustrating.
It's kind of interesting if you go into, like you read the Satoshi kind of quotes, and even he admitted that Bitcoin escrow wasn't as good as human escrow. And there's another place where he admits that Bitcoin itself is susceptible to. I think he spoke in relation to quantum computing. I think he said Bitcoin itself is susceptible to a stronger hashing signature algorithm, almost admitting that Bitcoin isn't the kind of ultimately ideal money. And I've kind of probably spent too much time reading through all this stuff and Nash and analysing it, but
no, I don't think you have. I mean, I think that if my belief, right, is that this is a 100-year technology, like the small blockers, right, on Twitter. It's like a nightmare, just even like interacting with anybody. To be honest with you,
is that BSV? Is that
no? I'm core and lightning.
Yeah, small block. Yeah, exactly. But
of course. Sorry, yeah, of course. Yeah.
But the general idea is more of like, no. I'm more interested in the economic underlying system of like, if you take this, you're researching and trying to figure out who Nash is, how it relates, all this kind of stuff. I feel like your research and your writing is going to be just as useful 50 to 100 years from now, because I think we already missed the boat, right? Like Ethereum kind of stepped into the path while Bitcoin was getting split apart, right? So there was this big political nonsense that happened inside of the hash wars and everything. And by luck and by design, Ethereum and the like really stepped in and said, hey, we could do colored coins, right? We could do NFTs. And the reality is that we all know that basically if you look at the protocol and stuff, like, well, we could do all that stuff anyway on Bitcoin, but we just chose to go down a path and Wall Street co-opted it where we've got this, hey, it's digital gold. And so my biggest interest in this right now is going like, well, no, actually, I think we screwed up, right? We got to go back and figure out how to mesh the big block, small block ethos together and then kind of have a ideal, I don't think about it as ideal money. I think of it as ideal infrastructure for the digital age, and money can be a part of it on top of it. Like it's a good base to put money on, but my vision of it is just SMTP or the email protocol. It's just a really good version of a new protocol that we all can transact on. But because of the hash wars and because of everything that happened, everybody's just confused. And so for me, I don't think we're going to get back to the original white papers discussion for 30, 40 years from now. Like we missed the political thing that happened, and if you want to believe the BS fears with MasterCard and all that kind of nonsense, doesn't matter. But what does matter is that the protocol itself did get split apart, giving this really big marketing and total addressable market that just went missing in Bitcoin because of the hash wars. And Ethereum stepped in, and now you've got Solana and all these other guys who are just like, they're operating on a proof of stake and proof of history and proof of all this stuff, which is fascinating to me. All this stuff is awesome because I think
40 years will be time traveling from now. What do you think of that?
I don't think anybody really knows that stuff.
Oh, you don't think 30, 40s?
Well, I think
40 years?
If you take a look at the Weinsteins, well, think about it. You think about like all the stuff, if you listen to the podcast with the Weinsteins and Eric and, geometric unity and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff coming down the pipe. There's a lot of stuff.
They know what they're talking about.
Well, we don't have no idea if they know what they're talking about. I mean, he can't even prove he knows what he's talking about. So, but the idea is that there is some stuff on the table, right? At least from my.
Who created Bitcoin?
I think two nation states. I think the U.S. and Israel could create Bitcoin for sure. That's my best guess. Second best guess is Nash and some team. Third best guess is the psychopath running BSV. Fourth best guess is God knows anybody else.
Those are pretty good guesses.
You know, sad though, because I feel like this is something that even if we were able to prove, well, we are able to prove, right? So Satoshi could prove it's him. So even if they said, hey, I meant it to be like this, it's too late, right? It doesn't matter who invented it because the marketing and the world has co-opted it because Wall Street put enough money behind it that it's, hey, this is digital gold. And like we're missing 90% of the potential for this protocol that is just dropped on us like a futuristic time-traveling alien just dropped this document on us.
I want to revisit something real quick. Mike, have you ever, because you were talking about DeRose earlier, have you ever looked at Bitcoin.Foundation?
Yes, yeah. DeRose talked about that a lot. Yeah, so that was sort of the ossified early protocol that didn't incorporate things like SegWit. Right. And so DeRose was, for a while there, he was touting that as the real Bitcoin because this was right after the fork wars and whatnot. So it's like, you might as well go right back to the beginning. None of these, he was basically saying, none of you guys are Bitcoin. This was the real Bitcoin. And, you know, a lot of it is just kind of trolling and whatnot. Sure. But I mean, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I suppose that's true. I mean, it is the sort of the common lineage of all the forks. And it doesn't have what he called vendor extensions like SegWit. So to him, what he was saying is that was sort of like the rock, right? Gold, the protocol for gold is, you know, it's completely unchanging, unlike forks of Bitcoin where humans have gotten involved. But this the Bitcoin Foundation was pre all this stuff, and that was sort of the actual digital gold, you know, the unchanging protocol.
Yeah, I think that that's like an interesting line of thinking to say that basically you could pick up an old version, right?
Right.
And you could just basically fork off at any point, at any block you want to.
Yeah, because SegWit will look like an anyone can spend, right? So like you're assuming these vendor extensions will continue to be supported going forward, right? But if you're using the oldest version of the protocol, then it's going to be forward compatible, or at least that's the assumption.
Whereas some of these changes, a lot of these changes are no longer backwards compatible. So that's
exactly.
Which means that they basically they stole Satoshi early coins, right? Basically, you're not able to transact on that network and be able to, let's call it fiatize your Bitcoin.
No, I don't know about that. I think that it's the opposite of that. It's the opposite of that one. Whereas like the older addresses can be brought into the new address space naming convention, but the new naming convention cannot be
like one address. You can still compatible.
I got it.
Yeah, like you can still use one addresses. Everyone now uses SegWit, which is BC1. You know, it's that sort of I forget the name of that naming scheme.
Bitcoin.
BEC32. I think it's called BEC32. But yeah, it took a while there to use BEC32 because we had to wait for the wallets to catch up and incorporate it. So you right. For a while there was it only half worked where you could receive but you couldn't send, and it was kind of a clusterfuck a little bit until enough of the ecosystem upgraded and then it became usable. But it was never a problem if you were using a one address. You know, you could just use it with you got one address will work on BSV, BCH, BTC, right from the, you know what I mean? Like it is forward compatible towards, you know, every wallet out there, right? And then these vendor extensions require support, right? SegWit,
is because basically at any point old address coins can be moved and you need to be able to receive that.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they need to support. Yeah, exactly. SegWit, I believe it doubled the size of the code base. Like SegWit's as a feature, I guess it's fine, but in terms of complexity, and I'm not a coder, I'm probably not really speaking from a point of code authority, but from what I've read is that it increased the complexity of the code base quite a bit, and then you start to wonder, well, who's going to maintain this code base? The more complex something gets, you have a smaller and smaller group that even understands what's going on, and then you end up with sort of like a cabal. Right?
What does Nash say about that then? Right?
We'll get Luke Jr. to maintain that.
Yeah. And he's creating the next generation of core devs with all the kids.
Well, what we're realizing is that that's actually all that matters, though, right? No, well, that's all that matters, right? The idea is that the reason that the venture capitalists are all like bona fide over Ethereum and Solana and everything else is that because that's where all the developers are going. And if you interview any old venture capitalist, the idea is like, what's everybody doing on the weekend? And that's what I'm going to research, right? And so everybody started doing crypto, and so all the venture capitalists started doing crypto. But the idea is like their money's already, the money's there. The brain trust, the brain power, is all going to Ethereum and all the Sol and all the proof of stakes. It's not because it's better. It's just because that's where the marketing dollars went to. And so as much as we care about Bitcoin, there may be a marketing push and enough movement. Proof of stake just wins out in the end just because of marketing, which is like insane, right? But that's where the money is. Like if you guys look at the venture capital flow, nobody is going to proof of stake. Nobody. So there's no money, there's no brain power, right? There's like that core trust, right? The core, and there's people interested in it. But the capital markets as such, the trillions and trillions of dollars in capital markets, is being hook, line, and sinkers. That hey, Bitcoin is tired, right? And it's the new stuff, right? Because Solana is being pitched as the Nasdaq for the markets, and it's ridiculous. Like the whole thing is insane. But so what? All the money's already flowing in there. All the brain power is already flowing in there.
So the way I kind of see all this is Ethereum, Solana, they all flourish in a permissive regulatory environment. And Bitcoin is sort of the opposite. It's built like a tank. It's slow. It's unchanging, but it's kind of built for war. And it's built. So once and this is the bet. The bet is that eventually the regulators are going to crack down because. And once that happens, all the Solanas and the Ethereums and all these other coins that have been very successful within this permissive market, they'll be gone overnight because they'll be easy enough to take down. And and again, this is just a theory; it's a bet. It could be completely wrong, but the bet is that Bitcoin is built for the opposite, the draconian regulatory environment.
Right, but the draconian regulatory environment right now is the BSA and Treasury, and they are absolutely 100% painting day-glow orange every single Bitcoin. And so when you're saying that there's some type of, hey, it's ready for war, what I'm saying is that sure, it is. I mean, it is, but so what? Like, if everybody's on level 2, you don't think every single government can stop that transaction? So the problem that I find does always go back to this hash war stuff. I'm not a big blocker or small blocker. I'm more interested in what the economic incentives differentiate themselves after this hash war. And how does that look from a government standpoint, right? If they're going to shut it down, is it easier to shut it down from a concurrent digital gold small blocker? Is it easier to shut down if it's big blocker environment? Is it all that stuff is so much? If this is a 100-year document that was dropped out to us by a space alien, we're already changing it, right? You just said SegWit doubled the size of the thing. It's like, wait a second, this thing's supposed to be studied and researched and thought about carefully, and it's like, nope, just run as quickly as possible.
It reminds me of like Y2K when that happened, and they had in order to deal with all these old systems that were built in the 1950s, they literally had to go get retirees, like 80-year-olds, who they're the only ones who even understood how they worked to kind of fix these bugs to avoid Y2K.
Right,
yeah, exactly. Right. So who maintains the code base in a couple generations? You know, when it becomes so complex and arcane in terms of how it was written, and this kind of aversion to doing any sort of hard fork, so you're stuck with this sort of legacy code that still needs to be maintained if like a bug comes up or whatever. So it is a little concerning. It's like the brain trust, the number of people that actually understand the code base, you could probably count on your hands, right? So what happens in 20, 30 years when Luke or Greg or whoever else retires, the new crop of devs, will they be able to just step into this ancient code base?
Huge questions, and huge questions based on even security stuff. Like for me, I feel like if the core devs really are like the holders, then from a nation state perspective, it's pretty freaking easy to get rid of them. Like, to be honest with you, like you can hunt those guys. There's like 6 of them. You can hunt them down pretty quickly and kill them. So it's not like there's real like, hey, this is hard ass. It'll be around for 100 years. It's like, well, what if you kill the top 5 developers? Like, good luck trusting the people stepping into their shoes. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways that this goes bad, right? Very easily, this doesn't work. There's no, like, perfect ideal money because people are involved. Like, there is no...
What if there were no developers in Bitcoin? Would it not just continue...
Well, I guess the question is...
As it's been designed. So,
well, that's the early... Go ahead. Sorry, Johnny. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I saw that tweet from Mike in Space earlier this week about... He described it as a tank and... Let the regulators come. I saw that. I thought that was quite a good tweet.
But yeah, you always need devs because bugs show up and
going to
be dealt with.
Right, like the inflation bug or whatever the bugs happen, and like you need to have people to go, hey, this was not supposed to be. Yeah. You always have to have that. So it's hard to... Go ahead.
Yeah, but also just it's almost worse if you just have a new crop of devs that maybe they slip something in, and because no one's can really, validate the code on their own, they're just downloading the latest binary to run, then that gives that group a tremendous amount of power to maybe slip something in there that no one notices.
That sort of goes back to maybe that's why that Bitcoin Foundation thing has or could have legs in the future. Yeah. Right? If everything just kind of collapses in on itself, like in my opinion, we're in the 1997 stage of the crypto stuff where everybody was 97. I'm old as hell, so I remember it was Broadcom.com, Pets.com, Yahoo.com. Everybody was talking about it. It's all there was. And then you had a crash like 3 years later. And by the way, after the crash, if you were in internet stuff, .com stuff, you were made fun of for like 3 or 4 years after the .com crash. And so I feel like you're going to get the same buildup. There's about the same number of users as 97 or 98 on the internet that there are in Bitcoin. And so you're going to get this big, huge run-up. Everybody's going to be all in on it. It'll go down 90+%. And then after the washout, my hope is that after this next washout, there'll be some type of recognition of going, oh, hey, why don't we just go look at that original document again? Like, what was in there that was interesting?
Yeah.
And then kind of that Bitcoin Foundation will have that sort of maybe some value at that point in the future. But I could be wrong. I mean, proof of work is not the end all be all, although I feel like it might be, because I can picture, the sci-fi, like Dyson sphere around the sun, like really cool, crazy stuff to try to, mine the network and keep it up. But there's a lot of really cool futuristic stuff from a proof of work standpoint. But who knows? I mean, this proof of history that Solana's got, or, the Hedra hash graph with the proof of gossip. And I mean, all this stuff is interesting. I don't really understand if this stuff has staying power, but it really has unleashed this sort of creative economic flourishing. And I don't think any of us know sort of what is, ideal money in a Nash world from a proof of work standpoint may be very different from a proof of memory standpoint or a proof of gossip standpoint. Like, how do all those things interact together, and how are these economic systems affected? I mean, these conversations are so important and so fuzzy. They're so hard to grasp.
Yeah. It's interesting you said about the .com bubble bursting, because Satoshi spoke directly to that. He said, I hope it's understood. It was just the centralized nature of those business models that destroyed them. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, which is proof of stake, right? Centralized. That's the whole point of it, is that if you have the money, you make the rules. The whole beauty of Bitcoin, right, is that you have all the money, you can't make the rules. It doesn't matter. It's tough.
Yeah. Has Mike in Space dropped off?
Yeah, Mike.
To the barbecue.
Yeah,
I think I was offensive.
He had to cook.
The wife. He had to cook for the wife. I get that.
Hanging out. Obviously, you guys don't have to go. We can keep kicking things
Well,
around.
Johnny, I'd like to still kind of hear you kind of riff. I'm enjoying what you were saying. If you can maybe touch on if you've thought about those systems that I was kind of touching on, like, hey, like here's Nash's ideal money. In my mind, this is how it relates inside of the network. But again, like I was saying, it's like, okay, that's the proof of work network. We're all agreeing that this is sort of the most realistic form of capitalism where you don't have to trust anybody. This makes the most sense to me. So an ideal money would flourish inside of that system. But each of those edge pieces of the system are really important. So like maybe you can touch on anything inside of that where like, okay, it's a ideal money inside of proof of work. How does that make it better than a proof of stake? Or how does it make it better than a gossip network? Or how does that make it better? Like, I'm just trying to figure out, and again, I'm sorry that I'm rambling, but you've got this really good insight into true sort of the mix between the two. So I'd love to just hear you kind of go off and riff on it.
I think kind of a simple answer to that would be Bitcoin. Because I was kind of Jal introduced me into this John Nash kind of way of looking at what Bitcoin is, and since I've kind of got involved with that, it kind of on a simple level, it seems that Bitcoin is just a way of modelling kind of a non-cooperative game where people don't know whether they can trust other people into a way of modelling cooperation. So kind of what you're talking about there, what proof of work is, and the longest chain or the most trustworthy chain, it's a way of kind of going from a non-cooperative game to a cooperative game. And that's kind of where it comes into this idea of having an ideal money that can be, or a basis for ideal money that can be used or referenced or indexed in commercial contracts. So I think, personally, I think anything kind of above that, you're kind of getting into the realms of speculation and kind of financial speculation, where people might say, we've got this idea. I've not heard of proof of gossip before, so that's a new one on me, but whatever that means, that just kind of sounds quite like just a speculative idea, where kind of this idea of proof of work, the longest chain, the most trustworthy chain, is a way of kind of keeping everyone on the same page. So from non-cooperative game, you're getting into kind of modelling cooperation and kind of different levels of cooperation and different kind of qualities of cooperation. I don't know whether that makes any sense.
It does. It's very actually helpful to think about it through Nash's lens of just trying to make the connections. I still feel like I need there's this website called Rap Genius, and it just sort of like breaks down like songs, and you like highlight a sentence and it'll be like, this is what this sentence means. Like, I really want a high level Bitcoin white paper in Rap Genius, where you like highlight a thing, and sure, you've got people disagreeing, but at least it's like what this sentence means, what people think this sentence means, and I want you to write in that sentence like, well, this is how it relates to Nash, or this is what Nash would think about it. Like, I just need this central repository of thought because there's too much to tackle.
Well, kind of that's one of the reasons I run the bot, really, is it's Nash in Nash's words. So I don't kind of talk in the first person on it. It's just really just botting bits of ideal money, Nash's early game theory, bits of interviews he's done, video clips where he's been asked questions. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at with that, I think.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm so excited for you to be on the call, in a sense, because it's nice to know that somebody's sort of trying to make these connections. It's important to do.
I found it's quite easy on Twitter. You can get into interactions with people, and it starts out kind of all pleasant and polite, but it doesn't take long for it to kind of disintegrate, and like messages get lost, or what you're trying to say gets trying to make people understand or convey a point. So I've kind of arrived at this kind of bot approach where I just copy and paste John Nash from his various works that are available in various places.
That's why I like that. That's why, that yours is awesome. That's why I like the Satoshi bot or whatever. They're just retweeting randomly, putting out randomly everything that he's ever said.
Yeah, that's kind of almost where the idea came from, because I worked on an assumption that if Nash is Satoshi, then there should be a Nash bot, just like there are a couple of Satoshi bots.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what? Again, I'm going to go back to the first question I asked you. You definitely didn't dodge it, but it was more on the lines of, because I think you're kind of trying to wrap around your head sort of how this relates anyway. But is there something that you've changed your mind on recently in regards to really anything in this kind of space? Like, were you like a month ago you're like, I hate NFTs, and now you're like, they're amazing. It's something like that. I'm just kind of getting a sense of you're obviously a very bright guy, and I just want to get some insight.
I've never really had any views on NFTs, but I think possibly...
No, it wasn't really NFT. I think they're interesting, but no, it was more along the lines of you personally, from your kind of, let's call it, insights into you putting together this bot, you kind of reflecting on the things that he said, the things that Satoshi said, just your general view of things. Have you changed your mind recently on anything that you've kind of researched or seen?
I've not changed my mind. The only thing that really happens is I become more convinced of that kind of argument or line of thinking. That's why I kind of continue to kind of write the occasional blog here and there. Like the way, for example, Nash spoke on the symmetry and game theory, and then you read Satoshi talking about symmetry and how Bitcoin forks are asymmetric, that they'll never pick up the hum of the world. And it's like there are some places where Satoshi speaks, his language is quite quick. What's the word? Quixotic. He kind of says he says things in like a dreamy fashion. And kind of, you read through Satoshi and then you read through Nash, it just seems... So has anything changed for me? Not really. I've just become more convinced of that kind of the relationship between the two. Don't know what Jal thinks to any of that.
He's in deep thought, maybe.
Is Jal still there?
I'm pretty sure he is. Maybe he just paused or...
Gone to the fridge to get a beer.
Yeah, who knows?
Johnny, what's your background? Where are you? What are you doing?
Yeah, so my background really is financial services. So I used to work in the City of London, like a stockbroker.
Mm-hmm.
That was a few years ago, and then I fell into kind of a different area of financial services, and that's where I first became aware of Bitcoin, and kind of I still work now, but yeah, really financial services.
Are you doing retail or institutional on the financial services?
Retail.
Okay.
Retail. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm similar. We're a registered investment advisor, so yeah, in the States it's a little bit different, I know, than the UK laws, but
kind of similar. So you kind of are you in New York? Is that where you are?
Yeah. So New York, New Jersey, we've got our offices. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it kind of sounds like I was doing a similar kind of thing. Yeah. But we were regulated by FCA, Financial Conduct Authority.
Yeah,
you've probably got an equivalent.
Yeah, SEC, FINRA. That's why I know the BIS and all these guys so well, and I'm so interested in sort of this discussion of Bitcoin being hard money and unstoppable, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, and it's very interesting, and I do see why that is, but if you've got the weight of a nation going, hey, look, we want to know where every single transaction occurs, and we want to be able to control those transactions. And that's where the Bitcoin discussions become really interesting, because it's like, well, you can actually stop Bitcoin if we're going down the path of which we're going, which is level 2. So from my knowledge is limited, but if we're on level 1, it'd be very, very, and it's useful and it's usable, it'd be very difficult to actually stop. But if we're on level 2s, like this, it's as good as proof of stake. There's no difference. So I don't know. Like I'm really confounded by the Twitter sphere, and especially obviously crypto Twitter, on this hard money line and like this impenetrable like tank. And I'm like, do you understand the power that the BIS has? Do you understand what FINRA can do? So I don't know. I'm very confused on. That's where again it comes back to this previous hash wars. It's like I don't know if we would have had these issues because if the underlying protocol was just like, hey, it's the new internet and everybody's just going to transact on top of it in a meaningful way, then there is no version of level 2s. There is no Ethereum. There's nothing. It's just, hey, this thing works perfectly. It is ideal money. It's like ideal everything. At least, again, my reading of everything that I've seen from Satoshi and the original white paper and the little code that I can read, it seems like it's more reasonable to take what was given to us, right, and use it than try to disrupt it and F it up. And it seems like Wall Street has already... I mean, it's already done. Like, it's already too late. Wall Street has co-opted it. It's digital gold. There's nothing else to talk about. Like, it's the new... And it's like... And I'm like, what the hell is everybody doing? I feel like I'm in a different planet, right? Because I just feel like we had this perfect or close to perfect thing that I think we all could agree was pretty spectacular. And now it's just broken apart into these pieces and this solid tank of moving gold. And it's like, what the hell are you guys even talking about? It doesn't make any sense because the government is going to stop every transaction. So how's that any different? It
was a new paradigm tool that people, retroactively pushed into mental models from before it existed. Is basically how I perceive the forks. It's like trying to take the thing, dismantle it, and reconstitute it as technologies that have already existed, such as national money, or cash, or
gold, or really any of that. No, you're 100% right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It just feels like it's becoming. It's like it was broken apart to fit the social fabric of society instead of it being itself on its own and being a new thing. And it was just forced to change in a weird way. And so again, I really want it. What I'm hoping, Johnny, that you end up doing is a way of really trying to dig in enough where it's not just here's the description of the ideal money, here's the description of how it connects to Bitcoin. It's almost more like here's the opcode. The operaturn, right, or whatever the opcode is. This is the opcode that actually allows the Nash equilibrium of X, Y. Like, you know what I'm saying? I really want to understand from a code level, right? Like how this opcode kind of it connects itself in some way to a bigger piece, right? And how it interacts. And again, going back to the rap genius discussion of like how the F does this sentence kind of interact with this code base. Like I want a sentence connected to the code base, connected to opinions. And again, if you could have that in a centralized place, he's laughing at me. I know. But to me, that would be really useful.
That's Twitter.
Because that's Twitter. It's not. No, Twitter's a goddamn nightmare to use. And I love it, but it's a goddamn nightmare.
I kind of with my blogs and my views on this, I kind of sometimes often feel I've just reached a point where I've kind of, this is my ideas, these are my views, and I'm not quite sure what else I've got in the locker, kind of thing.
But that's like, it's so helpful, right? Because you're at least from what I'm reading, you've read your viewers and everything. It's like you're adding those tools in the tool chest, right? When we're 50 years from now trying to, or 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, when the market goes down 90% and crypto gets destroyed because everybody and their mother is in it, and there's a description that I think we had right about once Twitter kind of does the lightning connections and like, well, who else are you going to reach? Where's your total addressable market? Like that's it. You're done. And so you get this like big peak, you get a big crash, and then a washout. And so I'm hoping in the washout, people like you, your data that you're kind of putting out there, the connections you're trying to make will help ease the pain of the transition that should have already happened in 2008 or 2010 when the white paper was released.
I mean, it's also possible that so Bitcoin, when it came into existence kind of 2008, 2009, so is that it's been around 12, 13 years? I mean, it is also possible something could come along that's better, and it could kind of disappear as quicker than it's kind of come into this world.
And
because if you consider
Go. Yeah.
So, I was going to say, because if you consider, like, Nash referred to ideal money as a media or a medium, so it's quite conceivable that a more efficient media might come along. So, for example, when I was working in the city of London, the motto of the London Stock Exchange is "My word is my bond." And I kind of got the impression, or get the impression, reading through some of the stuff that even Satoshi said, that he was aware that there are maybe the most efficient form of media is just to take somebody at their word, and that all of these discussions around technology and technological evolution, they might just become, too complicated to understand. I don't know what you think to that.
No, for sure. I completely agree with that. I mean, imagine trying to explain. I mean, we're on this call trying to explain Bitcoin, and I think that we're really good at it. And I mean, everybody else is sort of like, I mean, it's a very hard thing to define that this is good money or what good money actually equals, because for, let's call it our country, right, for 70% of the population, it's perfect. There's nothing wrong with fiat. Like, legitimately, it's fine. And before this crisis, and really leading up to it, for 30 years, the entire world was short dollars, meaning the entire world, it was, in any time of crisis, there was a need for dollars. And so there's this underlying historical need that just it's not going to go away anytime soon. And there's just no way. So I'm just trying to figure out, once this bubble blows over and we become more serious about this discussion, or at least in general, like the general public.
What do you think's in a bubble, Adam? Kind of just crypto generally, or?
Yeah, remember, we pointed out before regarding the that discussion about the 99 tech bubble. Again, I remember Broadcom.com. I remember Pets.com.
Beanie Baby bubble.
Exactly. And so we all can be under a shared delusion for quite some time.
I know people who were buying tech stock right at the peak of the bubble around that time on T20s. So you buy now and you settle within 20 days. And they were doing that right at the peak. And one of them got bankrupted through it.
Yeah. Well,
that's just an anecdote, but it kind of that just reminded me of what you're talking about there. Just reminded me of that.
And there's that giant liquidity that disappears during that time period where this transition happens, and there's just like Bitcoin in March, right? It went down to $3,000. Like, there's zero liquidity. So you're gonna see that always. That's always going to exist, and people are going to kind of talk trash in the crypto world because they're always like, "Oh, this is my 7th time being in a 70% drawdown," and that's true. But now the amount of people in the space is going to hit that 100 million mark or whatever it's going to end up being, and then when the total addressable market peaks out, you're going to have this big illiquidity moment where everybody just freaks out. So my thought was always kind of was that we were in a 99 style bubble. It's going to wash out. If you were in the space, you were going to be made fun of, right? Because you were made fun of if you were in Pets.com in 2002. Like, you were like, "You're an idiot. What's wrong with you?" Recognizing, by the way, that Pets.com sold like 3 years ago for $1 billion, like whatever it was. It was just early. Yeah. It was wrong because it was early. It wasn't wrong. It was right, but it was wrong because it was early. And so Bitcoin may be the right winner, right? But just like Amazon went down 90% post 99, Amazon still turned out to be the winner, but you lost all of your money. And unless you're an insane person, you sold out, right? Nobody loses 90% and then goes, no, I'm going to stick around. This is going to be fine. No, you get out. And so when everything goes down 90%, there's going to be a big-ass washout. And I think, and I hope, that more reasonable things step forward. I hope that this is the venture capital burning money, Broadcom.com, digging holes in the ground, laying fiber, and all those guys went bankrupt. And so my assumption is we're going to have the same issue. We're going to have all this venture capital money just burn. We saw it with kind of all this stuff. My assumption is we're going to get a big, giant washout. We're going to be made fun of for even being in this space. And then 5 years from then, it'll be the world. It'll obviously Bitcoin rules the world. Like, obviously that would have happened, but I think it's a little ways until we get there.
Okay.
And I hope because there's a little ways till we get there, we can fix it. Before we can, but I don't think we can.
Well,
I mean, all I really do with Bitcoin is I just buy it and then, or have bought it, and I just leave it. And I'm not really I don't really get involved in anything else. I have been in the past, but that's my view on it, that it's a relatively...
a chance to offer up some final thoughts, because we've been going for about an hour and a half. And who knows where Jowl is. Mike had to cook. So let's wrap it up. We're hanging out.
Well, Johnny, I appreciate you being on this call. This is really awesome for me. I think that you have really helped the space, and I really appreciate sort of what you put out. And the more you do, the better for everybody. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it's been nice speaking with you, Adam, and Michael, and everyone else. Don't know where Joel's gone. So thanks for the opportunity. It's the first time I've done one of these. And also thanks for kind of just generally publishing my work, Michael. So we'll see what happens.
No, it's great to get you on. And obviously, we talked earlier this week for a little while, so I'd already, kick some ideas around with you guys to hear your voice. And it's nice to be able to bring new voices into the audio space, so that people can actually hear you and humanize you. I think voice humanizes more than a lot of other things. When it's like a talking head, I think that we're watching and being overwhelmed with those sorts of things. So it's good. Obviously, people know you, and now they get to experience you at a vocal pace and inside of a dialogue. And it's not just these lofty ideas in text. You become a real person. So that's great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All good. That's great then.
Well, hey, you know what? Another Sunday in the books. It's been a good one. I'm glad to spend some time with you guys and talk. We will do this again before too long. I appreciate everybody taking the time, and we'll talk again soon.
Cool.
That's
Thanks,
great.
man. Thanks. Appreciate everybody's
Cheers,
time.
Michael.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.